The track you're about to listen to is Trying to Find a World That's Been and Gone by Noel Gallagher. This is being covered by Cameron Crease.
Only when I could try to turn the page, like the winds of change that come around now and then. The cold against my shoulder always seems to be there. Do you think I'll ever learn? Give me the will to carry on in a place where I belong, as we try to find a world that's been and gone. Give me the will to carry on in a place where I belong, as we try to find a world that's been and gone. As we try to find a world that's been and gone. As we try to find a world that's been and gone. As we try to find a world that's been and gone.
Blue Pigment Podcast is sponsored by Huscarl. Go to huscarl.co.uk and use the discount code BLUEPIGMENT for 15% off. Get yourself some t-shirts, stickers, baseball caps, hoodies, printouts, and many more products from Huscarl. Blue Pigment Podcast, sponsored by Huscarl. Hi everybody, today I'm joined by Paul. He is a chartered physiotherapist, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, and he is the host of Grappling With Physio Podcast. How are you today, Paul?
Yeah, good, thanks, Ash. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all, actually. Rush of a day, but glad to have you on. Glad to have a time to speak to you. I've listened to some of your audio clips from your own podcast before, and I've heard the bits that you've done on other podcasts like the Reorg podcast. And I really enjoyed listening to you and your story. So I wanted to get you on board with Blue Pigment Podcast so we could talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, being a physiotherapist, and, the creativity within that. Because just straight off the bat, this is kind of like a question straight off the bat. Being a physiotherapist and being into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, when you're throwing somebody about or folding them up like a pretzel, you must know this is the part of the body, this is where that muscle or that ligament attaches to this part and this part. And when you're folding them up, do you envision like the inside of their body getting contorted when you're beating them up?
Yeah, I never thought about it like that, but no, you're absolutely right. I'm usually too busy kind of like controlling my own breathing and stopping that person from doing that to me. But a lot of the time what happens is as soon as the sparring's finished, somebody always makes a beeline for me and they're like, oh, this hurts or this hurts, and what do you think it is? And I'm just like, oh God, I'm off the clock here. But it becomes automatic. you start going into, well, it could be this and it could be that, and and next thing you know, you've assessed them, diagnosed them unofficially. But yeah, no, it definitely enhances. Whenever I'm going to like a seminar, I'm going to a top level instructor and he's talking about how a manipulation of a joint, works, I've already understood exactly why, because of my knowledge of anatomy, the body and anatomy. So I can definitely understand it. Does it make it any easier to defend it or stop it? No, absolutely, absolutely not. Especially when somebody's a higher belt. But yeah,
that's it's like two good businesses to be in, I guess. So you can go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, fold someone in half, and then create a customer for your therapy. Yeah, that
would be very unethical for me to do. Such. How could you accuse me of such a thing? No, I don't know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I always say this, and I try and talk about this in my podcast. It's not a question of will I get injured in BJJ? It's when, and it's, the stats are there. You're going to experience some sort of ailment. And my job, hopefully in the podcast and with my work, is to just make you understand how quick you can manage that injury, how fast you can get back on the mat. So it doesn't keep you off the mat. It's the mat time that's so important to myself and other practitioners, and we get so much from it. So, why should that injury keep you off the mat for longer than what it should be? And that's what happens, initially when somebody gets injured. If they pick up an injury, the initial, especially in the acute phases, the initial kind of instinct is to just not train anymore. And prior to kind of, I work predominantly in occupational health, so business to business, and I run my own practice, as you can see the clinic in the background, where I work with one-on-one with athletes, mainly grapplers and BJJ practitioners. But my job is to maybe say, okay, well, you probably can't go back to rolling as intensely as what you were doing previously, but you can still train, and there is still other stuff that you can do. There's movement that you can do. There's specific exercises or an exercise regime that you can do that will essentially keep you fit, keep you healthy, it'll keep you processing the injury, and it'll keep you ready for when you do, go back onto the mat. And it's like, like think of, like infantry training. I'm an ex-infantry, you're still in the infantry. When somebody got injured, let's say, unfortunately, at Catterick, and they went to Williams Company, I think it's called, is it Williams Company, the rehabilitation company?
I think each division has their own rehabilitation.
Waterloo, or
yes.
I suppose each division have got their own. But whenever you go there, the instructors don't just go, yeah, okay, Sam, like, chill out on your bed and just, do whatever. They get you training within the parameters that you're fit and healthy to do. And the idea is that when you go into rehabilitation, you are fitter and healthier. So when you can be reintroduced back into the mat or your training regime or platoon, that you can hit the ground running, essentially.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it across the two different, if it's someone just for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and trying to get them back on the mat, if it's someone in military training, trying to get them back into the training so they can facilitate their role of the reason they've joined. So yeah, it would be good if, we could put more emphasis on maybe not getting injured in the first place. Prevention is better than cure. But if you are to get injured, then you have to go through the process of the cure to get, and obviously being in that process isn't the best for your sort of mental health. When you're, when you're busted and you're bruised and you're feeling vulnerable, then inside you start to feel the same way too. So, go and getting to see somebody like yourself and getting you mended as soon as possible, getting you back into the swing of things is what's ideal, I guess.
Yeah.
And that whole getting back into the phys is also stopping you eating junk food, stopping you lounging around on the sofa and playing video games or whatever it is you're doing. So when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, how much of that do you feel, or, is there an element of that is really good for mental health, getting on the mat and being active?
Oh God. I can't overemphasize enough how important it is for your physical and your mental health. I think there's a couple of topics. Before we get into that, I think there's a couple of topics you brought up there that are quite quite prevalent. We should talk about them. And in terms of injury prevention, I mean, realistically, I don't think you can ever prevent injuries. They're going to happen at some particular point. Now, there are variables that you can manipulate and factors that you can control that make sure that you recover faster than others, or that you recover as healthy and as quickly as you can. You know, and those are things like 3 basic things. You know, there's no quick steps. Yes, once the trauma occurs, you've got to let the healing process happen, and the inflammatory process will be triggered, and the body needs to process that. But things like get a good night's sleep, staying well hydrated, and keeping as active as possible, you know, making sure you're getting the right diet and the nutrition, all of these things will help in adjunct to the specific rehabilitation program that you're given. So that's one thing in regards to, you know, like prevention is better than cure. There's only so much of that you can essentially do, but it's having a good response and able to, when something goes wrong, to be able to react to it very quickly and minimize the impact of injury. Now, in regards to getting on the mat, I mean, I just become a real moody, are you allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, correct.
I become a real moody fucker. I become a real miserable bastard if I can't get on the mat. And I train probably 3-4 times a week, about an hour and a half each session. So for me, it's super important. Even when I was, I'm ex-Irish Guards, when I was in the Guards, you know, it was very important for me to remain fit and healthy. And you kind of, when you leave the army and you step away from that, and you start working all the time, it's very hard to get that, you know, when you're in the army, fitness is part of your role and it's integrated into your daily activity. And outside of that, and you do a civilian job, you're working and you train in your own time. And sometimes you can be a bit demotivated. So it's very important. It really is. I mean, I always call it especially when it comes to mental health, I always say there's the grey cloud. And I don't think necessarily you have to be kind of like diagnosed with PTSD or suffer that kind of any kind of like mental illness. But I think having served, and I've suffered with this previously, there are just days where I look like I'm walking around chewing a wasp, and it's this kind of grey cloud that catches up with me. And I've had that every now and again intermittently since leaving the forces. Now, obviously, I've lost some best mates, and that has an impact upon it. And going to jiu-jitsu helps me shake that grey cloud. It really does. And it's like a massive dump of endorphins, clarity to the mind. And, you know, when I come off the mat, all those little things, those little snags, you know, those little things that tap away at you, that bother you, they're just, it's almost like flushing the metaphorical toilet and washing away all the shit and getting to start again. It's absolutely fantastic. And there's something innate, especially in males, and there are, like, you know, the female population, you know, there are lots of female jiu-jitsus, judokas that do it, that do the sport and probably get a lot from it. But speaking from the male perspective, there's something innate in all of us where, you know, you just got to do something physical with your fellow man. You've got to, be it sport, be it a non-contact, semi-contact sport. And for me personally, there's no better feeling than flipping, getting on the mat and rolling around with another bloke where I'm trying to strangle him or get a better position on him, or vice versa. I'm fighting that person off, because it's adversity essentially. And the more you expose yourself to adversity, you know, the more benefits you get from it. So yeah, I mean, it's really, really important for my mental and my physical health. Injury risk aside from that, it's very important for my mental health to get on the mat. One thing about jiu-jitsu is there are quite a lot of parallel with the military. It's very tribal, and there is a hierarchy. Yeah, so like let's say if you're in an infantry rifle company, you know you've got the pecking order at the top. From a non-commissioned perspective, you've got your company sergeant major, colour sergeants, your platoon sergeants, and then underneath that, well, you're in the Guards, we've got lance sergeants. I know that's a bit of a bone of contention for everybody else. We've got lance sergeants, lance corporals. Everyone else has got their corporals, lance corporals. So there's a pecking order, but it's the same in jiu-jitsu. You've got your head instructor, who's usually a black or a brown belt, whatever. And then there's obviously all the belts underneath. And then you get to a class, everybody lines up in that belt order. The instructor goes around, shakes everybody's hand. Hello, welcome to the session. you know, and there's a warm-up phase. You do your warm-up, you do your skill, whatever you're learning for that particular day. And then there's the spar, you know, and that's, you know, you touch hands, bump fists, quick slap, and then you go. And it's one of those sports that you can go like the clappers and not essentially, you know, get seriously injured or, well, yeah, majority of the time not get seriously injured, but be able to then go again the next day, etc., or the day after.
Yeah, I suppose that's it. With it being a martial art, you know, we talk about creativity, and I talk about you know, on the podcast, I always talk about the benefits of creativity. You know, you're hitting so many with mixed martial arts. You're hitting so many good mental health, you know, bonuses, things that will have a good effect on your mental health. You've got community, you've got physical activity, you've got creativity, and you're actually, you know, thinking of new ways and new situations to get in and get out of. Like you say, there's that human connection, because you're having a scrap with somebody, but it's like that human connection. How was that sort of dealt with during COVID sort of times, and how much of an effect did that have on the community of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community?
No, well, I'm sure it definitely took its toll. All those things that you just described, we weren't able to do. So yeah, it was pretty rough. Put it this way, everyone in my house, my wife, my 3 kids, were getting tapped and strangled at every opportunity. you got to roll with someone. Honestly, I got the mats out in the back garden, and I got my kids out. And it's play. It's, you know, it's great play. I've got 2 boys and an older daughter, and we're all on the mats playing around, and it was just like, right, go, all of you versus daddy, get past my guard.
Yeah, it's good fun. I bet it's some good fun, yeah, with the kids and the family. I bet it's
absolutely
good human connection and all that.
Definitely, and it's play, as long as you make it playful. I mean, look, COVID had a big impact initially, and then obviously, I think how some gyms overcame it, they needed to keep the community. You can't just stop, and you can't just go, well, that's us, all right, because so many people depend upon that, depend upon it for their physical and their mental health, and to suddenly not have that is, you know, be very detrimental. So a lot of gyms kept kind of communities going with Zoom classes, so you could do an online Zoom class, and that's very hard. You kind of, you know, the idea with JITS or BJJ is you got to work against someone. So, you know, you would do a Zoom class, and initially you would go through various techniques that you could do as an individual, body movements, practice hip escapes, etc. And then it kind of became a little bit redundant after about the 1st or 4th week, and you were like, well, I've got to get a little bit more imaginative there. And then it was like introducing family members, you know, lots of Zoom classes. I'd get like my daughter or my son, like, get a gi on, come on, you've got to do this with me. But Dad, I don't want to. You got no choice. And then when the bubble type thing introduced, and you could have essentially a bubble, so you create a bubble, someone who was doing it, and then be like, well, we'll form a bubble, and we'll train in my back garden, and then eventually, when all that kind of dropped away and they opened up the gyms, you know, it was like the mass exodus of everybody getting back to the gyms as fast as possible, you know. But unfortunately, we'd lost a bit of time. We'd all lost a bit of momentum. Your timing's off. Your conditioning's off. And, you know, but these things, they come back, and they have come back since then.
Yeah, trying to get people back into it. So I imagine, like you said about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you've got that hierarchy similar to the army. Is there sort of like a core values, like say in the British Army, as you know and I know, core values: courage, discipline, respect for others, integrity, loyalty, selfless commitment? Does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu integrate core values into the training?
Yeah, I mean, right, so how it works is a bit of a tough one to kind of explain. Right, and I'm probably not the best person to talk about this, but Jiu-Jitsu was born. There was a Scottish family that went to Brazil. They were the Gracies, okay. And then there was this he was a guy called Mitsu Maeda, and he was a Japanese judoka. And it was right at the time where they'd kind of changed judo and jiu-jitsu were very similar. I think jiu-jitsu, traditional jiu-jitsu and judo were very similar, but they wanted to make a sport. They wanted to make judo as a sport. And when you make a sport, you've got a rule set. So this guy went traveling to Brazil. They met the Gracie family. The Gracie family said, teach us what you know. And then they modified it and they put the Brazilian stamp on it. And then from that, you've had loads of different teams break out. So there was initially, I think at the beginning, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which was very much a self-defense, a form of self-defense martial art. And then since then, you've had the development of Jiu-Jitsu or BJJ as a sport. And the two are quite difficult. I'm probably not the best person to be talking about this. There's probably somebody out there listening to this going, oh, he's getting it so wrong. I hope I'm doing it justice. But you've got lots of different teams. Now, some teams are more established than others. Some teams have a curriculum. Some teams have core values. And other teams don't. And other teams have an unwritten rule and an understanding that when you come to the mat, you leave your ego at the door. And you know, if you're going to be a dick, you're going to get exposed very quickly because there's always somebody bigger and better than you. And I don't mean physically bigger. I've been tapped out many times by somebody, you know, a lot smaller, a lot of a smaller person, smaller frame, a lot younger, you know, and that can be kind of, well, if you don't have the mental strength for it, that can crush a lot of people if you've got a weak ego. If you can understand the bigger picture and learn from it and go, well, I wasn't up to scratch on that particular sparring session, then yeah, it can be crushing. But there are a lot of, once you get into jiu-jitsu, it's not so much okay, right, here are our core values, this is what we live by. It's almost like through attrition, anybody that turns up that doesn't stick gets kind of egos, arseholes, dickheads. They don't stay, you know, they get found out very quickly. If you're a bully, you get found out very quickly, super quick, and then you don't see those people again. You know, and if I go to my gym, like in my gym, you look around and like if I start from my head instructor, like the guy's 98% blind and he's an absolute ninja. Do you know what I mean? Like, he only needs 2% vision to destroy most people on the mat and probably in the street as well. Then I look at other people. I deal with teachers, architects, forces, blue light services, anything that you can imagine. That's everybody like that is drawn to the challenge of BJJ. I know I particularly am, because no day's the same. What you learn might be the same. What you learn one day, if you miss it and you're not there for that session, there's a chance that your instructor won't teach that again for maybe another 6 months or a year, because there's so much to cover. And it's just like, I've just missed that. And you've not got a chance. So I'm digressing a little bit here, but core values.
I suppose the army core values slip straight into mixed martial arts. You think about courage. It takes courage to get on the mat. You have to have the discipline, otherwise you're not going to fit in with the community. Respect for others, again, the whole community thing. Integrity. You've got to be integral to, even the belt that you wear. If you're wearing the wrong belt and you go up against somebody that's, a black belt, and you're telling everyone, that you've progressed up this and to that, you get what I mean. Loyalty. You're going to be loyal to your team and your did you call it a dojo?
Well, the dojo is where you go. I mean, what I think they kind of refer to it as a school because you're learning. And then
selfless commitment. Selfless commitment.
Yeah.
When somebody from your school is going off to do a tournament or a fight or whatever, you'd go and support them and watch them. So that you kind of hitting all the army core values, I think, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Absolutely. Or military.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, it's like when somebody does compete, if everyone can make it from the club, we're all there. Even if it's just one person, we're there to support that person. And within our club, especially myself, I mean, I'm ex-guards, there's an ex-Fusilier, there's an ex-Para, there's 2 ex-Bootneck Royal Marines. So it draws in those military guys because, it will, sound like I'm selling it. But you know what? So what? Yeah, it fills that void. If you leave or step away from the forces and there's, and for whatever reasons that you decided to leave, I'm sure they're valuable. I have my own reasons. but you're still left with a bit of a void. It's very hard to replicate that camaraderie that you feel with your brothers, with your unit, with your platoon, your company, etc. The closest I've ever got to replicating that is with jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think one of my previous guests, Caroline Walsh, she was saying the same thing. She was a ex-CIA, ex-US Coast Guard, and now she does stand-up comedy, and she feels the same from that, and surfing. So stand-up comedy, she does surfing and stuff like that, and she gets that same brotherhood or sisterhood, family bond. There are other ways of getting that brotherhood bond that we're talking about. It doesn't have to, it's not just the military you can get it from. If you join a community project, if you join a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, for example, you're going to eventually get that bond. You start from the bottom, as you do in any profession, and you get to know everyone, you work your way up, and that's the way it rolls, I guess. So I've recently been
no pun intended. Yeah. Rolls.
So I've recently been, me and the family been taking my little boy to like a martial arts lessons, and he's only 4.5. He sort of sits at the sideline and just watches at the moment. But is there an age that is best to get into it? Because I'm 35 now, and I've never been into sort of, apart from when I was a little kid, I did some mixed martial arts classes, and I've done some boxing training along the way, but I've never physically thought I'm going to get into this sport in so much so that I want to go and compete, because that absolutely terrifies me. 35-year-old, and it's probably that ego thing of, I've got a certain stature and people view me in a certain way, and for me to now go get into a sport, probably get filled in by some 12-year-old kid who's been doing it for the last 6 years or whatever. Is there an age, and is there a good time or a bad time to start?
Not really. You can do it there's a saying, jiu-jitsu for everyone, and you should be able to. If you scroll through Instagram enough, the algorithm might show you there's like 66-year-old black belts out there still competing to this day. How you roll and your game will determine how long you're in it, essentially. But it's a very interesting what you said. I'm 35, I've got this certain state. You're a colour sergeant in the paras. Yeah. So you've got a certain stature already, a hierarchy, but those are only hats. Only hats.
Hey, you mean masks?
I didn't mean to say.
I know what you're saying.
About hats.
I know what you're getting at. Leave it out.
I thought we'd get through the whole conversation without saying hat. But no, those are only hats, or a mask is something that you hide behind. A hat is what you put on and determines your social status, metaphorically speaking. Those are only hats that we wear or positions that we play. Yes, you do have to start again, but that causes more development, that causes more growth at 35 to turn up to a session, to put on a kimono or a gi, as they call them, feel a little bit insecure and think, I feel like a right dick here, because it feels like you're wearing a pair of pajamas. Put a white belt on, like a brand new white belt, and think, God, I feel like a day one, week one crow here, and being in your position, it might be daunting. And then somebody grabs hold of you and throws you. Next thing, you're not going to think about any of that. all that stuff, those things that we think, man, that's gone. All you're going to think of is, right, now what do I do? I don't want to get strangled. I've got to move. I've got to, I've got to breathe. I've got to get them off my back. And then you keep going, and you just keep going and keep going. And then it becomes to a point where it just becomes part of your life. And then that confidence you get from putting yourself in an uncomfortable position, you can then, that can be transferable, or it can run parallel to other situations. If you don't like stand-up, you said about that person who's a stand-up comedian, that absolutely petrifies me. That absolutely petrifies me to try and stand up and convince, people I'm funny or make them laugh. I just think, oh my God, it's not for me. Now, like, who's to say? I don't know. Might it be a goal in the future or a challenge? Maybe, potentially. I don't know. It's not my bucket list yet. but as an example, like it could there be so many parallels. When I was a young guardsman, and I went on kind of courses, and they were like stand up in front of the rest of the platoon and go through orders, and you're standing up there and you're shaking holding your orders, but thinking, God, everyone thinks I'm a dick and I can't do this, and I'm going to fumble all my words. And then, you know, your instructor goes, speak up, project your voice. And you just go, you know, no, Jiu-Jitsu will help with all of that. All right. You know, because it teaches you to turn into the thing that you're most scared of. Before I did Jiu-Jitsu, I boxed for the Irish Guards, I boxed for my battalion, I boxed for my club, I boxed for my uni at a decent level. I stopped boxing, and, you know, I got to a certain age where you can't do it anymore. But competition scared the shit out of me. And every time I had a fight, guaranteed, I'd be shaking with fear until I got hit that first punch you take in the face, and you realise I'm not made out of glass, you know. And it's the same. I've competed a few times in Jiu-Jitsu. I've not won a comp yet, or I've not won a bout yet. I'm competing again in a few weeks. And when I think about it, I get an adrenaline dump and I get nervous, but it's not stopping me. It's not gonna, the fear's not gonna prevent me from doing it. I won't be succumbed to fear. I want to compete. I want to face the danger. Very much like when you're in the army. Army teaches you when you're up shit creek without a paddle that you run towards it, don't you? You don't turn and peg it the opposite way. You know, that's one of those things. And
yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's that getting out of your comfort zone is where you learn how good you are. I mean, I'm saying this to everybody that's listening. You don't know how good you are until you are way out of your depth. And then you realize, hang on, I can handle this. And then you crack on. I mean, I know from the podcast episode you did with the Reorg podcast, and obviously you do your own podcast, Grappling with Physio. And I remember you saying on the Reorg podcast how the first time you made an episode and you were thinking, who's going to listen to me? You know, who cares about what I'm going to say? Should I press send? Should I press send? Send. And then you're that nervous, because I did the exact same thing with this podcast, you know, nervous of what's everyone going to think of me. And then now I just don't care, because most people are so worried about themselves. They're not really bothered about what we're up to. And anyway, in what we're saying is relevant, and it's important for some people to hear it. So
exactly, and that's an internal narrative or monologue. You've got to be very careful. That's the ego. That's the ego talking to you. That's the ego saying, play the grey man. Don't get outside of your lane. Stay within your comfort zone. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's, you know,
that's very much a military thing, isn't it? Play the grey man.
Is that, I don't know if you've read the book, The Chimp Paradox?
I've got it.
Yeah. And it says it in there, doesn't it? About you've got one side of your brain that's just saying, stay in lane, don't do anything outside the ordinary, just do what you do. Got another side that's getting anxious and excited about things, because that's the chimp side of your brain. And then it's not until your logical brain kicks in and goes, oh, actually, why am I feeling like this? Why am I thinking like this? I don't need to think like that. I can just go and do these things. And then once your logical brain is sort of caught up with you, you function a lot better as a person. And it's a really good way of playing life and going through life as just sort of self-analyzing, I guess, self-analyzing yourself at every opportunity and going, why do I think like this? Why do I feel like this? How can I improve?
But you can go too far. You can be over analytical. You can be very self-critical to the point where it stops you from taking that step and having that, you know, that leap of faith. And that's what it was with me with the podcast, because it was something different. It was like the Primary Physio podcast, and I wanted to speak to the physios. I wanted to speak to orthopedic surgeons. I wanted to speak to patients of mine. I wanted to speak to military personnel who'd made great recoveries and stuff like that. And it just kind of, it wasn't going that way. And the first few guests were my patients and friends and people that I trained with. And I just went, hang on a second. I love jiu-jitsu. I love physio. I love grappling. And I love having a chat. Why don't I just call it something else and change it? And then I haven't got the pressure of what I did previously. So it's adapting, you know, to that situation. But the problem is that internal monologue can be a little bit debilitating sometimes, and it can, you know, stop you from achieving what potentially, you know, you could go out there and achieve. I did have an issue. I think it was an insecurity issue, especially when I left the army. You know, and it must be the same for every regiment. I guess paras are no different, probably a little bit more so, but they fill your head with so much, you know, we're the best at doing this, we're the best at doing that, they're all chippies, they're all crap, they're this, they're that, you know, we're this, we're that. And you can kind of buy into that a little bit. Now, I always kept my foot in the door, metaphorically speaking, you know, take all that with a pinch of salt. When it did come to leaving, it was all about, you know, adaptability. I mean, I'll be honest, I joined probably like most people, social economic reasons, and I wasn't going anywhere and I didn't achieve anything at school. And the army for me was a way out. But it was great, and it was the making of me. It really was, and it's probably the making of most people. But be able to, you know, take what you got from it, use it to the best of your advantage. But don't cling on to too much stuff, okay? Because that can slow you down. You know, I give you an example. So the guards, I would probably say, is one of the last bastions to the class, you know, the class system. All the officers have got second incomes, double barrel surnames. Dave from the Real Podcast is probably going, hang on a minute. He's got a double barrel surname as well. But you know what I mean? The majority of them have got these double barrel surnames, and they all went to Eton or Harrow, or, you know, they're very well educated. Now, there are some good ones and there are some absolute stinkers, and they could probably say about the same about the NCOs. I'm only talking from my experience. But that can kind of keep you in your lane. Do you know what I mean? That can be a really bad thing to say, well, don't get above your station because, you know, you're not from that background or you haven't had that education. And it took me a long time to fuck all that bollocks. That means nothing. So when I left, I had to go through this process of development and growth and go back to night school, get to university. And again, that was the most kind of like, when I got to university, the most intimidating thing at university at the age of 27 was being in a class with like very smart and articulate 18-year-olds. There's a side of me that said, these fuckers have got no life experience whatsoever. They've not done a tour. They've not seen this. They've not seen that. But they didn't need to, because they'd chosen a different path. And for me to hang on to that would be, you know, and be like, oh, I'm this, I'm that, and then see it affecting my grades and my ability to learn and pass the course. It was too much. You've got to let it go. You've got to expect, you know, over the course of a degree, which a lot of the time in a medical degree is minimum 3 years, you're not going to get everything right. You're not going to know it. You're not going to be the top student. You're not going to be the bright star. You're not going to. The course is too big, and there's other people at different levels. All what matters is that you get your head down and you pass it. And I failed a couple of modules, and it was crushing, you know, failing a clinical placement initially, but it forces you to be very reflective and say, right, instead of like, well, it was their fault, and pass the buck or pass the blame, it forced me to go, well, what did I do wrong here? And then growth and development comes from that. And again, I suppose there's parallels with jits, and that's probably why I like jits. I still get that to this day as a physio. There are situations where you could potentially get caught out and you think, oh, hang on a second. You know, you can't just pay lip service when somebody's paying you to assess them, and you think, I think this is their condition. You've got to be concentrating and get it right. So I'm grateful for the forces for giving me that ability to reach my potential and you know, and to get outside of that. And I recommend anybody out there, you know, who's considering leaving, don't ever think you're limited to one specific thing, and don't listen to anybody else if they're not promoting you or actively getting behind you to say you got the potential to do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's such a powerful message you just said there, because a lot of people also in their forces, they're proud of what they do. They're proud of, I am this, I do that. Whereas when they leave, you are still the same person that did those things. So instead of being proud of what you do, just be proud of yourself, be proud of what you've achieved, but then also think, I want to, you know, don't just say, I'm proud of what I've achieved. That's that, put it to bed. Be proud of what you've achieved and think about what else you can achieve, what else you can do now that you're a free range, you know, agent. Go do whatever you want in the world, you know, hopefully for good. Yeah. But yeah, everyone should be proud of themselves have pride in your unit, or have pride in your history, but be proud of yourself as well and what you've done and what you've achieved. And where do you see your podcast going? So, you've got your podcast says, it says what's in the tin. You've got Grappling with Physio Podcast. You've got the sports, the physio side, and the community and the conversations and talking side of stuff. Where does it go from now? How do you want to grow it?
It's a good question. Dave asked me this from the Real Podcast. The most important thing is the podcast is there selfishly for a bit of my own development, because I get to speak to people like yourself. Okay, who probably ordinarily wouldn't have had the chance to sit down and have a good convo, a bit of a conflab. I get to meet people that, again, I probably wouldn't ordinarily met. It helps with development, personal, being able to talk, communication skills. So I really like that aspect. And do you know what? It has opened a few doors. So it's not so much that, like, since I've been doing it, everybody's like, oh, you're the physio, we want to come and see it. So from a business perspective, not so much, a little bit. But it is a hobby. And the most important thing is, same way Jits is a hobby, the podcast is a hobby, and that I enjoy it and I have good fun, and I don't take myself too seriously with it, and I don't take where I'm going with it. In all honesty, I'm a bit rudderless on that aspect. I don't know. I'm just going with it, and I've got a list of people. I've got a list here, and there's 30 names on that podcast of people that I want to get through. And when I get through that list, I'll write another list. And anything that happens in between now and then is a bonus, is an absolute bonus. And where I'm going with it is, as long as I can still put content out there, and as long as I can still have a chat with people and debate and whatever, like, just do what we're doing now. As long as I can continue doing that, then I'll do it for as long as I like. And then that's great, because selfishly, I feel good for it, and I get some great feedback. I mean, I've not got many subscribers, but it doesn't matter. It's like, I'll get a message every now and again, well, like yourself, and saying, oh, I listened to that and I really enjoyed it. And if I can reach one person, because there might be somebody in my situation years ago who might be looking for that, and they might stumble across what I'm getting out there. And hopefully what I'm trying to get out there, this is a bit deep, and again, it's the ego, is the truth. I'm trying to get some truth out there, so I'm not sugarcoat or bullshit anything like that and say, oh, this is great. To get some truth out there, and speak to people and let them say, yeah, I still struggle with this. Yeah, I did this. This was hard. Despite what you see on my Instagram profile, I'm still a father. I still struggle with this. I still struggle with that. So other people can listen to that and relate to it. And I suppose that's where I'm going with it. And there are a few other avenues, in regards to getting some content and building an online course for injury management, and doing jiu-jitsu has made me very confident and creative in other areas. So there's a guy, and I'm digressing a little bit here. There's a guy I work with, and he's a film student at Coventry University, and we chatted last night, and we're going to make a little mini documentary. Now, if you'd have said to me, like, there'll be something that runs in the background, all right? Because, it doesn't have to be out straight away. It'll be ready when it's done. And we're going to do a little documentary, I don't know, maybe a 45-minute one or whatever. But if you'd have said to me before I'd started the podcast 2-3 years ago, in a few years, you'll be interested, you'll probably be looking or writing a storyboard for a documentary, I'd have been like, no way, no, what are you talking about? But that's the beauty of Jits, has given me confidence to be more creative. I suppose that's where I'm going. It's just
that's
to keep
amazing.
doing.
That's amazing. That's brilliant. Yeah. Sorry, I was interrupted, but just keep doing what you're doing, and because that's what I've done. I've only been doing the podcast for about just under a year now, and I hate listening back to my first couple of episodes. I feel like my first couple of episodes, I've got my phone voice on, like, oh, hello, it's Ash here, like proper like posh voice. I listen back to it now, I'm like, you sound like a knob. but from that, I'm like, right, what I've developed from that to now, my audios are better, my visuals are slightly improved. Where do I want to go from this now? And each time I'm thinking, where do I want to go now? Where do I want to go now? So I'm developing, just like you are, you're developing, and that it's that making sure you're staying creative. So I'm really excited about that. However long it takes you to bring out this documentary, I think that's a great thing. That's a really, it's drive, it's got purpose, it's got vision, and yeah, you should definitely go with that. I mean, amazing stuff. Yeah, cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and look, it's one of them. It's like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But at least I've tried. At least you've got to try. Like if you have an idea, or you've got a motive to do something, then act. You've got to act on it. Or you've got to. It's all right to fail. Yeah, you fail all the time, but then learn from that failure. All right, you've got to. I mean, I've failed at shitloads of things, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I mean, I talked about this on Hugh's podcast, HR. I had a private practice and I failed at it. I sucked at running a private business as a sole income because I was working at the same time and I couldn't balance the two, and I wasn't aligned with my priorities. Now, you know what it's like when you fail a course in the military. Yeah, you get a big fat Freddy and you put your flipping, your thumb up your arse and you think, oh, not literally, by the way, but the proverbial thumb goes up the bum and you just think, oh shit, I'm that. No, you're not. You failed. So what? You just get back on the flipping treadmill and get back on with it. And don't be afraid of failing. There's a bit of an emphasis on that in the military. It's like, I've got to pass every course. I've got to pass grade. I've got to, I've got to be this. I've got to be that. Some of the best. Jesus Christ, the sun is really burning me. Good job I'm not a vampire. Some of the most experienced guys and the ones I learned the most from, I would say, reflecting back on my military career, with those kind of 12, 13-year Lance Corporals, that just did quite a few courses, went through battalion, different companies, etc. Not necessarily the career flyers, what I mean? And I just think, there's a place for those guys. Those, I'm not saying I was one. I'm just saying those are some of the people that I learned from, and just. You'll get so much more from failing. And yeah, this is a parallel to Jiu-Jitsu. You'll fail every day. You will fail every time you're on the mat. You'll think you're doing well, or you've got advanced to a good position, and then bam, you'll get caught with something else, and you just think, oh God, how did I fail? Oh. So loads of development, growth, and creativity, because it forces you, to think, right, I don't want to go through that again, or I don't want to do that again. What do I need to change?
100%. Yeah, massively. I did that on P Company. So I was 17 years old when I first did P Company. Failed it. Well, it's got a stand-up fail. So I did the whole test week, the whole P Company got a stand-up fail on the square. And I was so devastated and distraught that it gave me so much drive to do better. And since then, I can't think of anything that I failed that has been that, phys orientated or something like that. I've been very driven to make sure that I, stay on top of myself with stuff like that, just because of, and that's just from a learning point of view. I learned something from being distraught is when, what do they call it? Post sort of, I wouldn't say traumatic, but post-traumatic growth. I wouldn't say it's traumatic to fail, but, I was distraught, but the growth from that and how you develop as a person is failure is where learning happens. So totally agree.
What was that like? Because did you have to rejoin another platoon, or just another kind of intake of B Company then?
Yeah, so I got back. It was only like 4 weeks. I got back squatted to a different platoon 4 weeks, and then they did P Company, and then passed it on that one. Still devastated about it now, but it's done and dusted.
Yeah, but that, Ash, makes for a great story of like what you said. Now, you could have wrapped in on there, and you could have been a green jacket. Well, they're no longer here. Sorry, you could have been a guardsman. All right.
You can say that because you were a guardsman, right? Okay.
Yeah, I can say that because you could have gone off. I joined Guards Company.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it does.
You know what I mean? You could have joined. You could have just gone, I'll just do that, but you didn't, and you used it against you, and you went back in. That's the only problem. Like it's and there's a parallel with this with being injured from the mat or being back squatted. All right, the tribe. You're then detached. You're ostracized. From the group.
Well, at least that's how you feel internally. Yeah. Exactly
how you feel internally. Now, go back to hunter-gatherer. If you were ostracized from the group, you couldn't hunt with the rest of the pack. Therefore, you couldn't eat. Therefore, you died.
Yeah.
Because if you were hunting, you ate what essentially you killed. But if you can't hunt, Jesus Christ, if you couldn't hunt, then you got the leftovers or the scraps, and that's unfortunately, hence survival of the fittest. But
yeah, 100%, yeah.
It's one of those things. You used it for your motivation, and you didn't fail again.
Yeah, that's true. So where can people find your stuff? Where can we find your podcast? What platforms it on, and what other sort of things have you got going on that we could sort of advertise now for everyone?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me social media. I'm on Instagram, and it's just, if you just search at Grappling With Physio Podcast, or I think it's just Grappling. The handle is at Grappling With Physio. I'm also on YouTube, so I've got my own YouTube page, and it's on most of the other outlets: iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, whatever. It's on all of those. So the software links it to all podcast outlets.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate having you on, Paul. Thanks a lot. I'll put all the links to your YouTube and your podcast on to this episode. I really appreciate having you on. You covered off some really good points there. Any last final points that you want to say or talk about?
Get on the mat. find a BJJ school. Don't worry about how old you are or what rank you are or whatever it is, your social setting.
You saying this straight to me? Just me. You, Ash. You get on the mat. I'm going to fill you in.
Get on. Anyone out there? Get yourself on the mat. Find a BJJ school and get rolling. And that's you will definitely it will be a life-changing experience. I guarantee it. And good luck.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been a pleasure having you on. Speak to you soon.
Cheers, Ash. Thanks.
You're listening to Blue Pigment Podcast. If you want to become a patron of this show, please go to patreon.com/bluepigment. You will be helping me help the talent that I find along the way. Not only that, the podcast is an advocate for mental health and the positive message in which we want to send about mental health. So if you are a bit about that and you want to jump on board, then please become a patron at patreon.com/bluepigment. Would love to have you on board. And not only that, you'll get the chance to get some free stuff and be giving another big giveaway soon. To find out what it is, go to patreon.com/bluepigment, become a patron and get yourself some free stuff.
The opinions or views expressed on this podcast are solely of my own or the guests and do not represent the opinions or views of anybody else or the Ministry of Defence.
Shish kebab, Shawshank Redemption, Chicago! You're out of there!